Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming out to the Maxon booth today. It's an honor to be here. Hello to everyone on the interwebs. Good to have you here as well. My name is EJ Hassenfratz. I'm from Denver, Colorado, freelance motion graphics artist and teacher as well. I teach Cinema 4D. I've been teaching it for about 5 years because I love it so stinking much. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for, the grayscale gorillas of the world and the video co-pilots sharing their knowledge. So, I love to give back. So just to put everything out here, if you want to learn anything more about anything I'm talking about, check out my website. I got like over 150 tutorials on it. I'm also launching C4D Bootcamp on schoolofmotion.com. Any School of Motion fans out there? Yeah, all right. So that's launching in 2 weeks. Holy crap, that's exciting. It's going to take you from knowing no 3D at all to being like, I'm going to nail this. I got this. And then I also have a weekly series on lynda.com where I'm releasing a new tutorial every week. It's about 10 minutes long, so nice, easy bites you can, digest on your lunch break and stuff like that. So definitely check out that. And then you can follow me on the Twitters, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the YouTubes, the MySpaces, all down there, all at iDesign. All right? So why did I start using Cinema 4D? Well, it's because I truly think it's the easiest way to learn 3D. And I feel like if I would have started using another 3D app, it might have discouraged me from ever learning it or learning it way further down the road just because of the ease of use. And you're going to see a lot of, in my presentation and in the presentations throughout the entire week, how easy it is to do some pretty complicated, complex-looking stuff with like clicks of a button. So I'm going to show you a lot of like why I feel like it's so easy to do. So another reason why I absolutely love Cinema 4D is because it's so versatile. You don't have to be like a VFX artist and just a VFX artist to use this. You can do anything. And like with AR and VR and video games and all this stuff, all these new venues to create 3D, Cinema 4D is that versatile with a large tool set to be able to help you create and make art for whatever clients that you come across. And personally, for me, I've really been loving Cinema 4D because it's allowed me to reinvent myself as an artist. I kind of started down a certain path, and I'm doing completely different work today, and I don't think it would be possible without all the amazing tools inside of Cinema 4D. So a little bit about my career. I started working at NBC and then ABC at local TV news stations in Pittsburgh, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. So I was animating NBC and ABC logos for a very long time, and that's actually how I got into 3D. This was about, early 2000s. Everyone was like, oh my goodness, 3D text, that's amazing. So it's like that's what I started doing, and 3D-ifying logos and stuff like that. And then I was like, you know what, I'm kind of done with the local news game, and just tired of news, and especially tired of news now. But I got out, and I'm going freelance. And when I was in DC, I knew some people at some of the local sports teams like NHL and Caps and all that stuff, and started working on like sports logos. I'm like, this is cool, this is different. I'm animating logos, but it's for cool sports teams and stuff like that. And I was like, you know what? After a few years of that, I'm like, oh my God, I can't animate another 3D logo ever again. I was just getting creatively stale. So I was like, well, what do I do now? And I started looking on the internet, watching grayscale gorilla tutorials, binge watching them like Netflix, and really with no aim whatsoever of, what I should be doing. And I just kind of had a realization where I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of chasing all these shiny keys everywhere, but I really am not that good at my fundamentals. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna be honest with myself and look at my work and be like, where am I lacking, and focus on that. And I think it's important as artists we always be mindful and do some self-reflection of where we are in our career and just try to see what our weaknesses are and attack them. So that's kind of what I did. And Cinema 4D's tool set really assisted me in that. So you see right here, we have this like 2D style looking composition, but you can see it's actually completely 3D. So I decided, I need to focus on my design fundamentals, my color, my composition, my animation fundamentals, and what I ended up using was a renderer called Sketch and Toon, which I'll show right off the bat, that allows you to take a piece of 3D geometry like this and turn it into something that looks like it was made in After Effects or a 2D application. And this was just like such a huge thing for me to be able to kind of strip away like all of the more complex 3D concepts and just go to straight color and shapes, because that's design, right? So that really allowed me to focus on that. So back to basics, right? So what I ended up started doing was building inanimate objects and just kind of breathing life into them, making them bounce around, and just practicing all those animation fundamentals. Squash and stretch, exaggeration, overshoot, all that good stuff. And I was like, this is fun, like breathing life into, giving personality to like a cube or a sphere or a hamburger, for example. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go a step further with this personality thing. I'm going to put eyeballs and a mouth on it and do a little bit of character animation, right? And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go even further and slap on some arms and legs and like get into actually more complex character animation. So it was this like self-reflective path that I found this love of animating and breathing life into just really goofy, little stuff like this. But that was creatively fulfilling to me, and total 180 from 3D logo animation and stuff like that. And then that was 2D, and this is it. This is that rendered with Octane too. So it's like, it's 3D, but you can make it 2Dified as well. So through Cinema 4D and its toolset, and specifically the Sketch and Toon module, which I'll be showing shortly, really led me in a new path in my career. And it was because of those tools and the variety of tools in Cinema 4D that allowed me to be versatile as an artist and as a freelancer to be able to tackle whatever projects that clients throw at me. So a little bit of some of the examples of some of the work that I do. I will show my reel very quickly. So thank you. So that's a little bit of the type of work that I do. Enough jibber-jabbering about myself. What I'm going to talk to you guys about today is first how to start integrating 3D into your 2D workflow. Is there anyone using After Effects out there that's just thinking about 3D or just getting new into 3D? All right. So I'm going to show you how you can, with like just a couple clicks of a button, turn a 3D composition into 2D using, again, that Sketch and Toon renderer. And then I'm going to just show you some very time-saving animation tools that I love using that helps you automate some very complex animation as well. And then I'm going to go on to very easy character animation workflow so you can go home and animate your own hamburger. That's the goal at the end of the day. And then finish up with just some general time-saving project management tips too. So there we go, end with the slide. So here's my first project. That's that little joystick I was showing earlier. Let me just go into interactive render region here. You're going to see that this just has some very basic materials on here, just your normal diffuse. And I've been talking a lot about the Sketch and Toon renderer. Well, to add Sketch and Toon, you simply go into your render settings, and it's actually an effect. And if you go to your effect menu, Sketch and Toon, well, bam, totally turns everything into like the cel-shaded 2D with just a single click of a button. And it adds these really nice outlines as well. So if you're a 2D artist and you're like, well, I don't know how 3D would really work for me, this is like this huge, awesome bridge that can connect you into the world of 3D and help augment your workflow. Because the great part about building assets in 3D is that if you need to rotate something like a head or something like this, you don't have to fake it and like animate a whole crap ton of shape layers to be able to get like fake that movement. If you need to rotate something in 3D, you take that whole group of objects, you hit R, and you rotate. So you don't have to fake anything at all. So you're spending less time trying to troubleshoot how to do something, and you just do it, right? So we got some outlines here. We got levels of cell shading here, and that's controlled in the shading tab. And by default, it's set to quantize, and that's just basically how many levels of colors do you want added to your object. So I can do, maybe 2. And we have way more cartoony, way more stylized, where we have like a specular highlight, it's normal color, and then it's shadow, right? And we can also just turn off illumination altogether and just get super flat 2D artwork as well. But it's got that nice 3D depth as well. But you're going to notice that the one thing that's happening is we have a camera here, and we get that kind of lens distortion where it doesn't look, it looks 3D, it gives that 3D aesthetic, but what if we want to just like flatten that out so it looks even more 2D? So something I like to do when I'm building 2D assets in 3D is using the parallel camera inside of Cinema 4D. So typically you have the projection camera. Let me just zoom out. You get this, lens distortion, and it kind of, this could be cool for certain effects, but you want to flatten things out when it's 2D, make it a little bit more geometric. So watch what happens when I go to parallel. You're going to see that it just flattens it out, removes all that lens distortion, and this is what I like to call the SimCity look, where you're at that, angle of perspective and everything's way flat, right? So this just kind of adds some really nice 2D-ness to your image and just really flattens everything out. Let me just go and turn on that illumination again. One other cool thing I like to do is you saw I added this kind of like stylized grain effect to my render as well. So I can do that very easily by going ahead, and there's a really cool thing you can do is applying a texture with an alpha to a light, and that adds some nice texture to it. It's almost like a gobo. So here's my little grain texture. It's simply, if I go to my alpha, it's just simple noise here with a little bit of contrast, right? So just some grain. It's loaded in the alpha channel. Watch what happens when I apply that to my light. So I got my little light over here. Just going to apply that. And you're going to see as this renders, it adds this really nice grain because the light is actually being filtered through and being knocked through that like matte alpha that is that grain. So we got some really nice grain in the shadows. That specular highlights kind of broken up and nice and grainy. And then even our shadow has this nice grain as well. So there is so many things you can easily do. Like with just a few clicks of a button, I have like this really nice stylized, grainy 2D aesthetic piece of work here. All right, so I just want to now share some like really nice animation tips. So like once you can make 2D artwork, how can you then animate it? And I just got, let me stop my little bee. So you can see this is just toon shaded as well. So that effect that I showed was kind of scene-wide. You can actually create little cell shader materials as well and apply cell shading on a material basis or object level basis and control it with a gradient there. But what I want to talk about is that Cinema 4D is also like a full-fledged animation app as well. Let me just move the little bee over here. And see, I laid all these keyframes, and let's just say this was for a client, right? And I sent this to the client. I'm like, man, I spent a long time, really fine-tuning this animation. Sent it to the client, and the client's like, yes, this is absolutely perfect. No changes whatsoever. That never happens. There's always one change, right? So let's just say that this client's like, you know what? When the bee is doing his little flipsy doodle in the middle of air, in midair, I want you to slow that down like bullet time. And you're like, oh, man, like I laid all these keyframes, and to retime this, like I'll basically have to adjust all my curves and manually do that. But not anymore. So there's something, people that are familiar with time remapping in After Effects, right? There's actually a time remapping feature in Cinema 4D as well. It's called time tracks. And how it works is you need to create a new object that you can add a time track to. Okay, so I'm just going to create a null and just name it time track. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is just set some keyframes. Just let me just set a keyframe in the visibility here. So just so it shows up in my timeline. And then to load a time track, I just need to go to Create, Add Special Tracks, the very special track, and just a time track. Okay. And there is time. We can rename this. So just I can rename this Retime. All right. And what I'm going to do is basically just select all the animation tracks. I'm just holding Command to select multiple tracks. And just selecting all the tracks that I want to change. And I got to get my rotation here. Yep, got that selected. Got the strength and rotation. Now, how many people have ever paid attention to this time track option down here? One person, two people, okay. I very rarely, three people, okay. But there's like a lot of people here. So not a lot of people know or even have noticed this at all. So this time track actually allows you to, once you create a time track, load one in, and this time track is then going to control all of those animation tracks. So if I just twirl down what this time track is, it's representing animation as a percentage, okay? So if I click on this keyframe, boop, you can see it's 100%. So 100% completion, 0% completion of an animation. And if I hit play, you're going to see that actually nothing changed at all because this is a linear track. So it's just proceeding from 0% of the animation to 100% animation over the span of the animation that is 145 frames, right? So remember, I want to slow this down in mid-flipsy-doodle, okay? The little flip. So what I'm going to do is just like wherever I want it to start slowing down, I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to command-click and add a keyframe there. And then I can right-click and just make this an easy ease. So we have easy ease, all that stuff in here, just like After Effects, and just kind of adjust that. And then what I'm going to do is find where in my animation that he's going to complete his little flip and just set a keyframe there. And then basically just to space out that timing, I'm just going to move these last two keyframes down to just space that out. So there's going to be a lot more time between this point and this point. So I also need to extend my timeline as well. So let me go ahead and do that. So let's see, that would be like 185, something like that. Let's see, 185, bam. And just extend that. And let me just adjust this little keyframe here. You should always, when you're laying keyframes, you should always just tweak it just a little bit, give it a little bit of love. And let's just see what this animation looks like now. So he's doing his flip. And and you can see that now he's slowing down because we just remapped that portion of the animation. So using time remapping, you don't have to actually totally redo your entire animation. So you can go to your client and be like, man, that took a lot of hours, and make it look like it was really, really hard. So time remapping, really, really cool feature. Another thing is, for After Effects users that may be super used to speed graph, there's no speed graph in Cinema 4D. It is all value graph. And it's weird because I learned animating in Cinema 4D, and I'm like, I never needed a speed graph. But for people that are from After Effects and want that speed graph, you can't actually edit a speed graph. You can only view it in Cinema 4D. So if you go to F-curve and go to show velocity, okay, now you can go, I'm just going to hit tab and go into just my F-curve mode. And you can see here's my value graph and here's my speed graph here as well. And you could, so it's just good to reference it if you're used to, referencing the speed graph just to kind of get your feet wet animating in Cinema 4D there. All right. So that was just, normal keyframings and retiming stuff. Now I want to talk about some really cool animation tools that allow you to do some really cool animation very easily and actually automates it as well. So I like to demo this little effect with a sphere. And one of my favorite deformers, if you know and watch my tutorials, is the Jiggle Deformer. And it's aptly named. It does what it says. It makes things very jiggly. And I always like to demo what the Jiggle Deformer does with a pink sphere that is absolutely not Kirby. And what I'm going to do is just hit play. And for a deformer to work upon an object, I just need to make it a child. So a deformer is kind of like an After Effects effect. You apply it to layers, right? So I got this Jiggle Deformer effect. And if I hit play and move this around, you can see that it adds this nice like springy movement, jiggly movement to my sphere. So we got this oscillation and decay and all this really good stuff. And that's pretty cool in itself. That's done without any keyframes whatsoever to add that nice extra springy movement. But where the fun really starts is where you utilize some of the fall off of a deformer, like a Jiggle Deformer, where you can actually control how much of that jiggle is being applied across your object. So say you want this to like squash and stretch, right? Well, what we can do is this infinite, the shape is set to infinite now, so it's just adding jiggle all across the object evenly. But if I use like a linear fall off, what we can do now is basically use these two planes that show, how much percentage as a gradient from one plane to the other, how much that jiggle is being applied. So if I hit play, you can see now that wherever that red plane is, that's actually getting 100% of the jiggle, and it's slowly fading off to 0% jiggle to the right side of this, this yellow plane. So it's a visual representation of that fall off. So that's cool, but I actually want this to be squashed and stretchy. So what I need to do is just change the orientation of my jiggle. And I think if I do, nope, let's do -Y. So the 100% jiggle's on the top. And now you can see I can bounce this around, and all this really nice squash and stretch animation is added as like a simulation. So I don't have to keyframe that at all, right? Which is really, really cool. And the Jiggle Deformer is like, it's like the Swiss Army knife. It's like the MacGyver of Cinema 4D. It can do a lot of really cool things depending on what you're working with. So let's kind of take this into application. So another really cool feature in Cinema 4D is effectors. And I have a couple of plane effectors here. And all of this animation is basically, if I bring up my timeline, being driven by 4 keyframes, okay? And we have what's called a delay effector, which is kind of like a Jiggle Deformer where it adds nice springy movement, right? But I'm just going to turn that off for now. And let's apply a Jiggle Deformer to this text to make it a little bit more springy and squash and stretchy. So I'm just going to go to my Deformer menu, go to Jiggle, and make it a child of my MoText object there, which is just, it generates 3D text. And what you're going to notice is that nothing is working. And the reason for that is MoText is an effect that creates or generates geometry. So what's actually happening is the Jiggle Deformer is not recognizing all of the polygons of this object because it's just an effect. So it's kind of like if you are in After Effects and you're working with particular and you want to add an effect on top of it, it's not going to work. You need to pre-comp that, right, and collapse all that down, and then you can add other effects. So kind of like the same thing. So the one object we can basically collapse our object together like a pre-comp is called a connect object. So if I just go and place my MoText object as a child of my connect object, and then just go ahead and I can drag and drop my materials onto that connect object to just maintain that. And I just want to show that this is like fairly 2D, like 2D textures, but we're in 3D world. And now let's hit play. Let's see. Let's go. Oh, gotta make. There we go. So make it in the same level of hierarchy. Bam. And now we got this really springy movement, right? So again, where the real fun is when we use that fall off. Okay. So I'm going to use that linear fall off and make it be. Let's see. Yep. And just move this up. So the yellow, remember, is 0% jiggle. So basically, the bottom of the object will have 0% jiggle, and the top will have 100%. And we get this really nice squash and stretchy animation, which is really, really cool. Now, for those of you who are used to Cinema 4D, you might be thinking, well, why didn't you just make the text editable, and then you could easily just, see what the Jiggle Deformer can just act upon it, right? But the thing is, the benefit of keeping things procedural and non-destructive is that I can go into this, and if you're working on, a show package or something that you need to make a lot of these little bouncy titles, you just simply go into the text field of your MoText because it's still live, right? And just go max on, right? And that's going to update. And now you got this other animation here as well. You can just switch this to NAB, right? And that'll update and then render that out. So you can iterate very, very easily by procedurally building all this stuff. So that's kind of why you want to, whenever you can, don't make things editable unless you absolutely have to. So the connect object is very helpful in that regard. So another example of the Jiggle Deformer in like a show package is using a different, so I was using all linear fall-offs. I'm using a linear or a spherical fall-off here, right? So basically what's happening is this is just a cube, and the Jiggle Deformer, if I just move this over, you can see that the 100% strength of the jiggle is in the center of that cube, and then fades out as towards the outside of the object. So what actually happens, if I just undo that, is that the jiggle, it adds this nice like follow through and overshoot kind of thing, and exaggerated movement, squash and stretch, all this good stuff by having the jiggle concentrated in the center and then fade off on the end. So we get this really nice energetic kind of movement. Now watch what happens if I just turn off the jiggle. Fairly boring animation, right? So Jiggle Deformer, no keyframes, it really adds some nice character and appeal to your animations. One other thing it can do is, let me just show this animation really quick. So you see I got this like T guy, and you can see like the T kind of bouncing around and reacting and undulating and stuff like that. That's all Jiggle Deformer. So a Jiggle Deformer can also turn objects into like liquid or even cloth simulations as well. So let me just go ahead and let's see. Let's go in here and yep. Okay, so basically all of this liquid here is just a bool. And it's a cube just bowled out with a cylinder. And what I want to do is add really nice liquidy effects to this. So I'm going to use the Jiggle Deformer. And if I just make this a child of my cube and hit play, nothing's going to happen, right? But the one cool thing in the Jiggle Deformer, aside from just adding jiggly movements, it can be affected by forces, like particle forces. If you go to your Simulate tab up here, we can go to turbulence. So this is just going to add turbulence to our scene. And then I just need to drag and drop that into the forces field. And you're not going to really notice anything right away. You can see a little bit of jiggling. It's very subtle. But let me just crank up the strength to maybe 15%, adjust the scale. And now you can see like kind of like, you know, water, like liquid kind of stuff happening. So let's just maybe do 25. So really cool stuff that you can animate liquid with this. But the cool thing is remember the jiggly movement. I can move this around and like tip this over, and it kind of wobbles. But you're going to see that physically is not accurate at all. I'm no scientist, but that doesn't look right. So what's happening is we need to have that coffee, that cube with the coffee movement on it, always facing upwards. So we can easily do that by using a constraint tag. And in the constraint tag, you can add this aim effect and basically tell an object to always aim in a certain direction. So I want this to aim upwards, which is positive Y. So I'll just click that. And now if I hit play and then rotate this, you're going to see now we got this nice kind of liquidy, fake liquid, toon liquid effect that's really cool with the Jiggle Deformer, right? And we can even add, you know, more jiggle effects. So we can adjust like the structure, we can adjust the drag, and you know, kind of control and art direct how much stiffness there is. And we can even turn down the strength of the aim, so we can get a little bit of delay as far as when that liquid is flowing. So you're getting a little bit of that delay there. The only problem with this is it kind of falls apart if he tips over a little bit too much. But this is really, really nice for you know, very simple liquid where you don't want to really get crazy with simulating liquid. But Jiggle Deformer does that. Jiggle Deformer can do like really nice cloth simulations as well. Very, very easy stuff. All right, so let's move on to another. So Jiggle Deformer, automate animation, simulate animation. Another thing I really love is dynamics. Okay, and here's a little logo that it's just dynamically getting blown away. And this was actually very, very easy to recreate. So here's just a little logo here, right? And I'm going to make this fracture. So in new to, I believe, Cinema 4D R18 or something like that, they added what's called Voronoi Fracture, or Voronoi Fracture, however you want to say it. And what it does is allows you to break up objects. So again, for a generator to act upon an object, it just needs to be the child of said object. And you're going to see now I got all these multicolored patterns, cell patterns in here. And this is basically just the fracturing my object. Nothing too exciting so far. But what I can do is actually crank up the random point generation that is basically adding all those fractured points there, all these multicolored fractures. And now what I want to do is make this dynamic, apply physics forces to this. So all I need to do for that is basically 2 clicks. One is to just right-click the object that I want to make dynamic, and then go to Simulation Tags and go to Rigid Body Tag. So what Dynamics allows you to do is apply physics forces to your object. And you're going to see that my object just kind of falls. Awesome animation, right? Not really. So what we're going to do is just make a floor for this to glide into. So I'm just going to use a disk and make this a little bit bigger and hit play again. See, it just falls to the floor. What's going on? Well, the disk is not actually taken into account in that physics dynamic simulation because we have to add a tag onto that so it's recognized in the simulation. So I'm just going to right-click, go to Simulation Tags, collider body, so I just want this to be collided into. I don't want this floor to fall. I just want it to be there and be able to be collided into. And now if I hit play, bam, just kind of shatters to the floor. And I feel like if you're familiar with Cinema 4D, you know that, okay, yeah, that's really cool. You can really do some really powerful dynamic simulations very quickly, very easily with just a few clicks of a button. But what if you wanted to art direct this dynamic simulation a little bit better? Because right now you hit play and it just falls. And that's because if you go into the collision tab here, the trigger is set to immediately. So at frame 0, it's going to trigger the dynamics. But what if we want to, again, art direct it and control where the dynamics is happening? Well, what we want to do is change this trigger to on collision, okay? So now when an object collides into certain pieces of this object, it'll then trigger the dynamics and then it'll fall, okay? So let's get our wrecking ball. It's going to be a sphere. I'll just move this off the side, make this a little smaller. And again, for this to be taken into account in the dynamic simulation, I need to make the collider tag. So I'm just going to command click and drag, just apply that same collider tag that we had on the floor, add that to our sphere. And then I'm just going to hit play. Whoop, what happened there? Let's go. Oh, I set the trigger. Okay, collision, on collision. There we go. Did I change it on the floor? Yeah. So I changed it on the floor, which was wrong. Okay. So now we're good. See, I'm hitting play. It's not colliding anymore. It's set to to trigger on collision. Here's my sphere, my wrecking ball. Pew, pew. It just kind of, does its thing, right? So let's hit play again. And you're going to see that you have the physics of my object colliding and hitting these objects, throw them all over the place, which is really cool. So this is one way to kind of move my sphere here. One way to kind of art direct your animation. But what if you don't want the action of your object hitting and throwing all these pieces all over the place? What if you just want this sphere to basically just trigger the dynamics to just simply fall and not shoot out over the place like a ball is hitting it? Well, there's something in the dynamics tag that's called, and actually if I right click and go to simulation tag, we got what's called a ghost body. Anyone ever pay attention to ghost body? No one. We got that same guy again. Yeah. So one guy, he knows a lot of Cinema 4D. So basically, a ghost body is really, really cool. And you can find it in your dynamics tab. Go to ghost, okay? And what I like to say is that now, instead of having this wrecking ball basically hit objects and have them fling and be impacted by those objects, this ghost body now spooks the little pieces to like, holy crap, and then just fall. Like they get scared and they just kind of fall down, which is pretty cool. So now you can just basically touch different pieces of the fractured object and have it be affected by dynamics. So I can just go right under here, kind of have this crumble like that. Really cool stuff. But where the real fun happens is if I go and hit Command D, go to my dynamic settings. Right now we just have default gravity. Let's just turn off gravity altogether, okay? And let's do this simulation again. I'm just going to hit play. And now you can see as I fracture this, it's kind of like I'm fracturing on Mars. So these things are just kind of floating away, which is really, really cool effect. And again, no keyframes whatsoever other than me having to keyframe this sphere, moving around and triggering the animation and triggering the dynamics as it passes through. So I can even maybe give this like a negative gravity, so things kind of fly upwards like that. So we've got this like reverse dynamics. Another cool thing is just like you can use particle forces with the Jiggle Deformer, you can also use particle forces like turbulence for your dynamic simulation. So let's go to simulate particles, turbulence. So again, this is just adding like turbulent wind. Let's kind of crank this up to like 25, maybe up the scale a little bit here. And hit play and just pass the sphere. Now watch what happens. Well, that's a little bit too big of turbulence. Let's just bring this down. So I just want it like very subtle effects. So let's bring that strength down. And let's go and just I'm gently touching the sphere, and you can see everything's just kind of floating away like it's in space, and that turbulence is affecting it. I can bring in a let's see, wind deformer here, or wind object, and just control this stuff just getting blown to the side. Pew! So really cool, like, decay, like just being disintegrated, and you can add like a lot more particles in here, or a lot more fractures in there as well. One easy way is to animate the sphere, because you can see as I'm like kind of just mousing this sphere all over the place, what if I actually wanted to keyframe that? That would be pretty hard, right? Not actually. So in After Effects, there's something called motion trace, where you can animate an object by dragging across your viewport, right? Well, there's something like that in Cinema 4D called Cappuccino, and it's just as amazing as actual Cappuccino as well, which I did not have this morning. So let's go ahead and go to Character. So in your Character menu, in the Manager, there's something called Cappuccino. You grab it, and what you want to do is start real time. And when you hit this button, it's going to record every mouse click that happens in your viewport. So watch what happens as I move my sphere. You can see all these keyframes in this animation track. So this is recording all of the movements that I'm doing with my mouse, and I can now art direct what parts of my animation or what parts of my object are fracturing, which is really awesome. So you can see all the sphere. It's tracked all of my movement in the viewport and laid it to keyframes. And if I go into my timeline, that's a lot of keyframes, right? So that's the amount of keyframes it would have taken to do that by hand. So good luck with that. So Cappuccino, really, really cool to be able to record your movements and combine with dynamics and ghost bodies, very spooky stuff, to really make some cool animations. And again, this is all flatly textured with just colors in the luminance channel. So this could be a really cool decay kind of effect for, let me just turn off the sphere from view, for like a 2D logo or something like that, right? Something like that. Cool. So dynamics, really, really awesome stuff. And here's like a, fake movie, kind of application of it, where you're just kind of zooming in and these things are just kind of flying all over the place, right? So do it for 3D stuff as well. All right, so now I want to go over to showed you how to make some really cool animations and generated them by simulations like Jiggle Deformer, dynamics. Now I want to move on to how easy it is to animate characters, okay? So here's a little penguin guy right here, right? And this guy is animated completely by deformers. So in the deformer menu, all of these really useful things, I'm just using a lot of them to animate. So let me just kind of break down how I built this. So here, the only animation I have is him kind of wobbling his arms. And this is all basically controlled by a pose morph tag, which allows you to store different states of an object. So you can see I have a couple poses here. One that's his base pose where his arms are just down, and then one pose where his arms are up. And then I can just keyframe the strength between those two different poses. And that's all I needed to do to kind of get that animation. So now let's go ahead and add some deformers here. So let's go ahead and let's grab a bend deformer. And if I make this a child of the geometry of the penguin, whoa, that's not right. Let's make it, we got, hierarchy is important. So I have multiple objects making up this penguin, which is, I'm not that great at modeling. Typically you'd want all the, the beak and stuff to be one cohesive piece. So I want the bend deformer to actually deform all of those objects as a whole. So I just need to make sure it's at the same level of hierarchy as all of my objects. And now he's not splitting apart, which is great. So let's just keep the y-axis length here. And you can see he's just kind of wobbling. Now, if I keyframe this strength, you can kind of see how that's a wobble. But what I can do is just shrink this down. And what I'm going to do is just bring this deformer all the way down to his feet, okay? And if I just kind of go like this, you can see that this is creating a kind of wobble where he's kind of on a seesaw by positioning that bend deformer at the very bottom, which is really cool. So that's kind of how I got that wobble. And then basically, with that wobble combined, I add even more kind of follow-through of this kind of wiggle by animating and bending the top of the body, too. So there's a little bit of follow-through and action like that. And then for him looking like he's going to walk, I just simply used a twist deformer. Bring this down here, shrink it down. And again, I'm going to position this, towards the bottom of his feet, and just kind of, let me just rotate this upside down. So it's twisting the top. I actually want him to twist his hips. So I'm just going to rotate this down, something like that. and that's kind of like his wobble. And combining the bend and the twist, and no shout, there's no twist and shout, but if I hit play here, the dad jokes are free. But I have all of these bend deformers here. You can see I have a squash and stretch as well, which is really, really awesome. It allows you to basically define parts of your geometry using these little brackets here. So the bottom of your object and the top of your object, and it's just going to squash and stretch. And you just keyframe that, right? And it squashes and stretches, which is really, really cool. And something I wish was in After Effects, but this would be, like I've tried to do this with Puppet Tool, and it's just a lot harder than just doing this. But you can see all of these objects combining together, stacked together to create a believable like walk cycle. So there's a shear, and again, I positioned that at the bottom. So it's kind of like this, wobble with his feet moving back and forth. And then that twist at the bottom, twisting his feet to make it look like he's walking. And then another twist for the top of the body, and then a bend deformer for the top of the body, another bend deformer that even accentuates the waddling, and then that squash and stretch to add some nice personality and bounce to it, add some weight to that character. So if you think that character animation is completely beyond your means, I hope this kind of opens your eyes to what you can do without needing to know any kind of complex rigging techniques at all, right? But if you did want to get a little, the coolest thing about this setup is, so I got my my penguin here, right? And this is all just a bunch of deformers. But what I can do, let me make this shorter. Okay. So what I can do is just switch out the object for something else. So remember that burger guy? I'm just going to switch him out and add him in there. And those deformers are intact, and I just animated a different character with a different kind of, fake walk cycle. So we got a little burger dude sitting here. So you can, I can add in a sphere. Let's just have a sphere animate and look kind of having personality. Let me just drag him into the hierarchy there. So like this is where I started like adding character animation or animation and bringing just simple objects to life. And this was really, really easy to be able, since you don't have to rig or wait, like you can just switch out objects. Now, mind you, these aren't like complex, realistic humanoid figures, but so let's go into rigging. So if rigging's always been kind of scary for you and IK and stuff like that, it's actually not that hard. Okay, so here's, let me just show you the final guy here. So I got a little sock character here, little sock head. So I just want to show you how I easily rigged this and added nice dynamics to this animation as well. So let's just go, and I'm just going to quickly do this. I'm running out of time. So I'm going to go and just grab some joints. So joints are like bones that give structure to your body. Like if you didn't have bones, you'd be like a jellyfish and just to the floor, right? So we need to add some bones to this. So let's just go, and I'm going to just command click and create my first joint, and then basically think of joints as bones. So the more bones you have, like I have 2 bones in my arm, and they bend, and it's a very sharp bend. My finger has 3 bones, and it's a much softer bend, more of a smoother arc. So what I want to do when I'm creating bones for something like the top of the sock, I want it to bend a little bit more smoothly. So I'm going to add like a few little bones in here, something like that, okay? So now all I need to do is basically create an IK chain that allows me to control the entire joint rig with a single object. So I'm just going to select all of my joints here, the first and the last, go to character, go to create IK chain, and that's going to add a goal. And just think of a goal as like your hand. Wherever your hand goes, your arm goes. So now I'm controlling all those bones with my null here, or with my joint here, okay? And now this is just kind of moving the joints by itself, and it's not merged. It's not doing anything to my sock geometry because there's no connection there. So to build the connection between the sock and the joints, I just need to select the sock and all the joints, go to character, bind, and that's going to create a skin deformer that's basically going to connect all of the joint movements and allow it to deform the geometry. And there we go. We got this really cool animation. And what I can even do is bring this IK tag down to the next object. There we go. And have this only affect the top of the object. Now, what if we wanted to add dynamics to this? So as let me just move all these together, group them together. Group. Now, what if I wanted this to kind of add that nice kind of bounciness with dynamics. Well, I can do that with simply a click of a button. Go to the dynamics tag in the IK chain, turn on enable, whoop, and now I got this really cool like kind of jiggle. And I can delete that joint null so it's not kind of constrained by that and have that kind of bounce around like that. And I can go into my dynamics tab, my dynamics expert tab here, and just turn off the gravity altogether as well. So now that won't be really affected by gravity or anything like that. And there's just a lot more controls here as well. The strength of the jiggle, how much it holds that position, how much it holds that rotation, and how much drag is there as well. So you can really fine tune this animation, right? So that's rigging, okay? And I actually have a lot more of my character presentation I present on Wednesday again. So I'm going to go even further into characters. So if this has piqued your interest, be sure to tune in or come by on Wednesday. I'm going to go even more in depth and cover more workflow tips, more character animation stuff. But again, if you want to know anything more about anything I talked about, I have a lot of tutorials that kind of supplement all the stuff that I showed. So definitely check me out on iDesign.com. If you have any questions about anything I showed on here, including people online, hit me up on Twitter. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about anything I demoed. Again, follow me on YouTube. I have a ton of tutorials on there as well if you want to dive a little bit more in depth in like toon shading, all stuff like that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out. Again, my name is EJ Hassenfratz. Thank you guys for coming.